The first word spoken by astronauts in space, before history is made, big or small, is Houston. NASA's Johnson Space Center has served as the iconic setting to some of humankind's greatest achievements. For 60 years, our center has been the world leader in human space exploration. On May 25, 1961, President John F. Kennedy committed the nation to achieve the goal of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth before the end of the decade. NASA's Space Task Group, in charge of America's human spaceflight program, was already working on Project Mercury to put astronauts into Earth's orbit. But with the additional task of a human lunar landing, it soon outgrew its facilities at NASA's Langley Research Center in Hampton, Virginia. The agency decided it needed a dedicated field center for human spaceflight. And on September 19, 1961, after evaluating multiple sites around the country, NASA announced that the new Manned Spacecraft Center would be built in Houston. You may have noticed we have already begun celebrating our 60th anniversary with a new logo and through a series of articles featuring aspects of the Space Center's history. We have even more planned throughout this celebratory year. Activities will include panel presentations, the installation of 60th anniversary light pole banners, social media posts about our history, merchandise emblazoned with the anniversary logo, a slideshow of JSC through the decades, a podcast reflecting on JSC's history, Building 9 catwalk tours and mission operations control room tours, videos, and more. This will all be capped off by an in-person event in spring 2022, COVID-19 permitting. JSC has made many giant leaps throughout the past 60 years. We fulfilled President Kennedy's goal of landing a man on the moon, and today we reach further into the stars as we push forward to the moon once again, and then on to Mars. For more than 20 years, we have successfully, continuously crewed the International Space Station, and we have so much more to accomplish with our Orion and Gateway programs. We continue to make history every day because of each of you. Let's take time to celebrate this milestone, both by looking back at what we as a center have accomplished, but also by looking forward to what's to come. Today, we push forward to the moon. Tomorrow, we leap to greater heights and new destinations. There is history to be made. In Mission Control, we eagerly anticipate the first transmissions from unexplored worlds.
Hello, welcome to our celebration of NASA's 60 years in Houston. From JSC's External Relations Office, I'm Nilofer Ramji. In 1961, the NASA administrator announced the completion of a location study which founded the new Manned Spaceflight Laboratory would be located in Houston, Texas, on 1,000 acres of land to be made available to the government by Rice University. Well, the name changed to the Manned Spacecraft Center by the time it opened for business, and years later to the Lyndon B. Johnson Space Center, and it has served as the home of human spaceflight in the United States ever since. Every single American spaceflight with people on board since Gemini 4 in 1965. As we look forward to the next 60 years, we really aim to focus on how Johnson Space Center's 60-year history is propelling us forward to the moon and onto Mars. There are many teams who work to ensure that this is a reality. Today, we have representation from the International Space Station, Commercial Low Earth Orbit, Gateway, Orion, and JSC's History Office. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, what they do, and in honor of the anniversary we're celebrating today, I'd love for each of you to tell us your earliest memory of JSC. Brian, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to do this today. I'm Ryan Prouty, and I am the representative here on this esteemed panel from Space Station. I am currently managing the Research Integration Office, and I've started in flight control, have done a plethora of jobs through the Space Station program, and even spent some time at the center level working on vision and strategy. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. It's not my earliest memory, but I think probably the most poignant when you're looking at the history of JSC and where we're headed, given a lot of the conversations we've had over the last couple of years. But it was about circa 2001, and I was a flight controller on console, I think during Expedition 3. And Sally Davis was the flight director on console, and she got on the loops and she said, I need all of you to stand up and meet me on the airwaves. We were like, what's happening? So we all stand up, and then just in the room, she says, I need all of you to look around you. We did. We're all looking, we're all college kids pretty much. We're looking around, and she said, this is the first time in history all women have been flying a spacecraft. I want you to remember this. So anyway, I do. And that was one of my favorite memories.
That's very inspirational. Camille, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, first of all. I'm Camille Lane. I'm the Deputy Manager for the Commercial LEO Development Program. And my earliest memory of JSC, actually, I've only been at JSC for 14 years, I believe. I think I'm going on 15. But I actually came to JSC before then because I was back years and years and years ago. I was a finalist for the astronaut selection. And so I got to be invited to come down and interview, and just being able to go to the 6th floor in Building 4 South and meet the other astronauts was just like incredible. And that for me was my first memory of being even associated with Johnson Space Center.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Camille. Glad you're here with us today. Next up, we have Rod Jones. Rod?
Well, thank you very much. My name is Rod Jones, and I'm currently the Gateway Vehicle Systems Integration Manager, and we're responsible for pulling together all the systems within the Gateway elements to make sure it works as a cohesive spacecraft. I started at JSC in 1984, and it's hard to remember back what impressed me back then, but I think what is absent today is what I remember the most. I was in an office. It was called the Manned Systems Division, and it was in the life sciences directorate at the time. And the folks in that division were really interesting to me. I came to JSC to work on the architecture and design of the inside of a space station, and all the folks in that division were associated with the equipment the crew lived with. The food they ate, the cameras they used, the equipment, the clothes they wore. And I got to sit in the same floor with people like Rita Rapp. Now, Rita was the food lead, and she had packed every meal for the crew since Mercury. I mean, the original brown paper bag sack lunches. She went to the store, bought the food, made the sandwiches, and packed it. And so listening to her anecdotes all the way up through shuttle and how that technology changed was really impressed me a lot. And that's my fondest memory, I think. Most impressed. Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck. And thanks, Rod. I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself here. And now let's hear from Chuck Dingle. Chuck?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me on today. So yeah, I'm currently the Orion Program Chief Engineer. My first memory of JSC goes back literally to when I was, I don't know, just a few years old. JSC has been part of my life for literally all my life. I grew up in the Houston, Clear Lake area. My dad worked at JSC. Then my older sister also worked here at JSC. As a kid, I was totally captivated by the Apollo missions. Just couldn't turn off the TV back then. Went to college here locally, went to the University of Houston, got a bachelor's in electrical engineering, started at JSC in 1983, and first started my career in FOD, first training crews and simulators, then as a flight controller. Then I went to engineering to work on the X-38 project as the environmental systems development lead, took on kind of more and more responsibilities, kind of got into the chief engineer line, and been working on Orion since it started in 2004, and various technical leadership roles, and now program chief engineer.
Wonderful, rich history with NASA. So speaking of history, finally we have John Urey. John?
Hi there, thank you for having me this afternoon. So I'm the manager of the JSC History Office. I've been at JSC for 34 years, and my first memory, actually, I was here as a tourist. And this was back in the day in 1984 when tourists were allowed to just walk around campus between the buildings. It wasn't such a secure facility. And I just remember walking around and looking at the buildings that I'd seen on TV and read about. And I think that day I decided that I needed to come and work here. And so 3 years later, 1987 is when I first started here at JSC as a contractor. I've been here ever since. Most of my career was working in the science areas. I worked the Shuttle Mir program. Then I worked in the International Space Station program in the Payloads Office, which is now the Research Integration Office that Ryan heads. And then about 5 years ago, I came over and started running the History Office because there was a need to resurrect the History Office at that time. And so I've had a lifelong interest in space history and, of course, of JSC's history. And I've been doing that for 5 years, and it's been fantastic.
Amazing. This is already so much fun. I think collectively, there's well over 60 years of experience with this group. So let's take a moment to look back. And John, I have a question for you. As the manager of the History Office, can you tell us a little bit about what the History Office does and how it's continued to preserve JSC's memories?
Sure. Well, preserving NASA's history is actually in the agency's charter. So it's something we're obligated to do. The JSC History Office has been on again and off again for the last 60 years. For the last 5 years, it's been very much on. We do a lot of things to preserve our history. The biggest project we've had going on since the late 90s is our oral history project, where we actually talk to individuals who are still here at JSC. Some have retired. And we get the history of what they did in their own words, their own experiences. So it's a very personal way to collect the history. Now, we do a lot of other things too, but right now we have about 1,400 oral histories, and these are accessible to everyone. We manage the JSC History Portal, which is a public website, and the transcripts of all of these oral histories are on that website, in addition to lots of other information about the history of JSC in particular and NASA as well. We have mission transcripts. We have editions of the JSC Roundup from 1961, from the very first edition that appeared November 1st, 1961. All of those have been scanned in and we have them on our portal. And we just have other information that is available to researchers, both here within NASA for use, if they want to find out how things were done in a previous program to help them with current and future programs, they can go to this site and find that information. And we also support outside researchers, whether it be universities who are looking to write histories. Around the Apollo 11 anniversary back in 2019, we had a lot of interest and a lot of researchers came to us looking for very specific information. These are the people that did the documentaries and the motion pictures that dealt with that anniversary. So yeah, go out there and look at that website. There's lots of great information there to be had about JSC's history.
That's fantastic. I bet you have some stories to tell based on those 1,400 oral histories. Wow. I have a follow-up question for you now. What's the most memorable interview you had or memorable story someone's told in that?
Well, I think some of the ones that are the most memorable is, we got to interview people like Neil Armstrong. So we have his oral history on our website. A lot of the other Apollo astronauts, some of the people we even went back to, NASA's predecessor organization, the NACA, and we've interviewed people from back in the 50s of what things were like even before NASA existed or before JSC existed here. So, and it's not just the famous people. We also have some engineers that worked out there and in the bowels of the buildings to get their stories. So it's not just the managers and the astronauts and the directors. We try to get a broad spectrum across the board of people who worked here at JSC.
Definitely, and I believe that will really shed light on JSC's history and really help tell our story. So, JSC has had a hand in several areas of human spaceflight, and one of those areas is with the International Space Station program. Excuse me. Ryan, building the International Space Station made the last 21 years of continuous human presence in space possible. Can you speak to some of the key areas of achievement that have added to the legacy of JSC?
Oh, it's an interesting way you wrote that question, right? That the word that really jumps out to me is legacy, right? There's a difference between achievements or things that we did, but there's this legacy that any legacy of ISS is going to be a legacy of JSC as the home for human spaceflight. the first one that comes to mind is just how much we have learned about the advancement and achievement for how to do research in space. Lessons that will help us in our further exploration to the moon and to Mars. At the core, however, I think there are legacies in the people and in the culture that I'll say history will mark, maybe John will mark, at JSC that really do work to propel us to the future. Clearly technical competence. ISS is the largest international technical achievement of its kind ever. The type of leaders that we've grown and taught in this long duration program in program integration and how to balance risk for the long haul, right? We didn't do short little sprints. We have been doing a marathon with little sprints on top of it along the way. And it's a different way to think about risk. And I think that's a skill that we've built for the whole center. Cross-center collaboration station would not be possible with help and work from every single center across the agency. One of I believe at its core will be one of the largest standing legacies is our international collaboration and space leadership on the world stage. It's the international piece is what brought me here, was to get to work doing something that was bigger than me, but at an international level. And then lately, I'll say a new legacy that we're just leaning into is leading the way for building a commercial economy in low Earth orbit. This is not something I thought I would be doing when I started before we even flew the first Element. So I think there's a lot in there.
Definitely. There's a lot to unpack there too. And I hope we can get more into that. Everyone definitely nodded when you said commercial low Earth orbit economy, and the International Space Station has really helped us kick that off. So Camille, since Commercial LEO is a recent undertaking at NASA, can you talk a little bit about its goals and aspirations?
Absolutely. I'm delighted to. It's one of my favorite topics. So as you said, Commercial LEO Development Program is one of the newest programs at the agency. And of course, we are housed here at Johnson Space Center. But we are responsible for creating and enabling a sustainable and robust marketplace and economy in low Earth orbit beyond the International Space Station when it comes to the end of its life, which we are now scheduled for 2030. But our office is enabling the next low Earth orbit platforms, right? That will be owned and operated not by NASA, which the International Space Station is, but owned and operated by commercial companies and commercial providers. And the reason for that is that we want to, one, have a sustainable presence in low Earth orbit as a nation. But NASA also has goals to continue to do research in microgravity environment, right? Using these platforms as a technology testbed for exploration, continuing to do human research, on the research on the human body and how the adaptation of space impacts the human body. And so we're still going to have these needs for low Earth orbit research. And so we hope to be one of many customers of these commercial platforms. But in the process, right, we talk about an economy. When we talk about economy, there's a supply and there's demand. And that commercial platform is the supply side. But we are also doing things now using the International Space Station to stimulate the demand. And Ryan touched a little bit on that. But things like private astronaut missions as part of that, stimulating the demand, the commercial use for advertising, marketing, and entertainment of the ISS is part of that demand. So we're not just enabling the supply with these commercial platforms, but we are also stimulating demand so that there's a robust marketplace at the end.
Definitely, and it allows us to explore our universe more than ever. And speaking of universe, we're going back to the moon, or forward to the moon and on to Mars. So let's talk a little bit about Orion. Chuck, would love to hear from you on how past JSC work on Apollo has contributed to Orion, and how and when Orion got started. There's a rich history there.
Okay, yeah, let's see. So you can, just take a look at Orion and you can tell that we certainly leverage some specific aspects of the Apollo program, architecturally having a separate crew module, service module, launch abort system, the shape of the crew module, physics stays the same between decades. So physics kind of dictates the shape is an appropriate one for the mission that we're flying. So we obviously leveraged that. We tweaked the shape just a little bit, but not so much that we couldn't use the Air Sciences database that was developed back as part of the Apollo program. We leveraged certain things from Apollo, like the TPS, the thermal protection system material on the base heat shield of the crew module. It's a little bit different than Apollo. We currently put it on in blocks instead of filling individual honeycomb cells, but the Avcoat material is essentially the same material that was flown on Apollo. Our analysis tools and the platforms they run on are certainly different and upgraded. But some of the core techniques that we used for our engineering analyses, we leveraged from Apollo. Some of the ops techniques obviously began back in Apollo. And I would just say, generally, across the entire team, there's enormous body of knowledge that was established back from Apollo. In terms of how Orion got started, so after the Columbia accident, I think the country came to the realization that the NASA human space flight program, we needed a different mission. We needed a different vehicle. I think it was January of 2004 that President Bush announced. I think they called it the Vision for Space Exploration, and said we're going back to the moon. So as part of that, the CEV, the Crew Exploration Vehicle, was born. Later became known as Orion. And the focus started a lot on the CEV spacecraft itself. We organized a team, stationed that team at headquarters to write an RFP, a request for a proposal. It led to a contract award for two competing teams. We awarded the two teams. So we were off and running with a prime contractor. Shortly after that, Mike Griffin came in, Dr. Griffin came in as the new NASA administrator. He realized there were some additional things that needed to be addressed in addition to the spacecraft itself, like what launch vehicle is it going to fly on? What's the lander going to look like? And so he put together a study team to kind of put together thoughts for the rest of the program, so to speak. We started the CEV, we called it a project office back then, 2006. Maybe half a year or so later, the Constellation program was born, and CEV was later named as Orion, became a project working as part of the Constellation program. And we down selected to a single prime contractor of those two, and I think it was 2007 or so. Spacecraft configuration evolved over time. We added the Europeans as a partner, and I think it was 2012 to supply a significant part of the service module known as the ESA service module, or ESM. We've flown 3 times. We flew, a lot of the early work was kind of focused towards the abort systems that we would use. So in 2010, we flew what we called PA1, or Pad Abort 1, the White Sands missile range in 2010. 2014, we had an orbital space flight called EFT-1 that we launched on a Delta Heavy. And in 2019, we did our first ascent abort flight test out at Cape Canaveral. And right now we're getting ready for our fourth flight, which will be Artemis 1, and it's right around the corner.
Very, very exciting. I see everybody's eyes light up when you said Artemis 1. And for those of you that are watching us today, you know, I started off 250 miles above the Earth and we're going further and further away. So let's talk a little bit about the Lunar Outpost, NASA's Gateway program. And I wanted to go to Rod for a second. Can you tell us what the aspirations are for Gateway and how it fits in with Artemis?
Absolutely. One of the things we learned from Apollo is that, you know, that was a very sprint-like mission. You had a very limited capability. In order to achieve that goal with the technologies we had, you know, the first lunar landing was only several hours before the crew had to get back in and come home. And so the purpose of our program is to make a more sustainable approach to exploration. Artemis is attempting to do that with the major components. Orion being, of course, the crewed vehicle that gets the crew to the lunar vicinity, a lander that gets them to the surface, and Gateway, which orbits the moon and provides that transportation link between the crewed vehicle from Earth to the crewed vehicle that gets you to the surface. So by breaking up that transportation loop, so to speak, each of those vehicles can specialize in their area of expertise and what they need to do, and allows us more robust exploration of the surface of the moon. So with the Gateway, we can leave an HLS or a lander docked for long periods of time and reuse it, which makes it sustainable. The Gateway can transition its orbit to other inclinations, which means we can explore almost nearly any point or on the surface of the moon, whereas before we were very limited to equatorial type landing sites. And so therefore, the goal of Gateway is to create that platform. It's a base camp in lunar orbit to enable sustainable exploration.
That was a wonderful, concise way of putting it. So just to elaborate that a little bit more, so how will that help us with upcoming Artemis missions as far as getting boots on the ground on the lunar surface?
Well, it allows you to bring the vehicles together so the Orion can dock, and so the Gateway itself is composed of 7 major components. It has a power propulsion element, which is basically a satellite bus which generates the power and does the attitude control of the stack and distributes power to the other elements. We have 2 habitable elements. One is made by Northrop Grumman called the Halo, and one is made by the ESA, our ESA partners called the IHAB. And these provide the living spaces for the crew. The key elements to these volumes, in addition to living space, are the ability for vehicles to dock to them. And so now we can have an aggregation point where we can bring in all kinds of future vehicles. We can bring in logistics, commercial resupply vehicles, future commercial crewed vehicles, and of course the commercial lunar landers. So by creating this network of architecture and not single point designs driven by a very specific mission, we have a more flexible and robust lunar exploration capability.
Robust, and it truly takes a village, as we've heard from everybody. I just wanted to take a step back for a second. So Camille, commercial LEO is very new to NASA, as you mentioned. And can you give us some perspective on how it's preparing us for the moon and Mars?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, you know, it's really a step from the ISS, right? I talked about ISS being owned and operated by NASA, commercial platform being owned and operated by commercial, but we, NASA, are going to be one of many customers. And so we want to, maintain a sustained presence in low Earth orbit, right, as a nation. So that's one of our goals. 2, we want to enable commercial marketplace. This really opens up commercialization and access to space for everyone, right? We started with the transportation systems, the CCP, the commercial crew program, the commercial resupply program as transportation systems commercially. But now we're working on the destination, the platforms, the commercial platforms. And so being one of many customers, we will still have needs in terms of wanting to do research in low Earth orbit, wanting to test out our Eclipse system for exploration, right? As part of the Artemis program, wanting to still understand there are a lot of human risk, right? To flying our astronauts for long durations, our human missions to Mars, for example. There are a lot of risk we're still buying down from a human adaptation perspective. And so using these platforms to continue to do research in the area of human research is one of the big things, the big areas we'll be focusing on. In addition to using it for other needs that we may have, beyond technology, doing microgravity, life science experiments, biological experiments, doing Earth and space science research like we do on the ISS. There will be capabilities on these commercial platforms for us to be able to do that, continue that type of research. And so we're really excited to see what these commercial providers come up with. We know that with commercial, they're more innovative and they're more agile and nimble, but also with competition, it drives down costs for us as NASA and as a country. And so we're really excited to see what designs they come up with and, and to partner with them to enable this new capability coming online.
That was a fantastic response, and one of the things that you truly mentioned was the platforms that we're using and the research in low Earth orbit. So, Ryan, I wanted to toss it back to you to talk a little bit about some of the what stands out to you as being one of the most exciting advancements being made to enable scientific discovery aboard the International Space Station. What is there something that you would like to touch on?
Oh, yes. I have lots of favorites.
That was a good question, I know.
That's not fair. I always tell everybody on my team, find that one thing that really gets you jazzed. And, I could think through a whole list of, even in the last 5 years, what we have figured out to do in space between microbe identification, where we used to have to return samples to the ground. We can now do that on orbit. Molecular biology processes where we learned how to break, repair, and resequence DNA in space. This comes into play, like Camille's saying, when we learn or when we have our crews way out there and we need to repair damaged DNA caused by radiation, or even when they come home. I'm at a conference right now, and just today I heard a number of scientists talk about tissue chip experiments and aiding in the science of cell regeneration. And we're doing experiments on the space station right now where we're looking at growing flat tissues like skin or tubular tissues like our vascular system, all the way to full up solid organs, and how doing fundamental science in low Earth orbit helps us do that, really just to make life better on Earth.
Better on Earth, and then help us explore the moon and Mars. So there's like a triple whammy here, if not more, to deep space. Exactly. It's just our universe is here to explore, and I see everyone smiling and nodding. And I wanted to take a minute, John. I have another question for you. So, as the manager of the History Office, share your perspective on the center's evolution and how it's preparing us for the moon and Mars.
Okay, it's a big question, but I'll try to summarize it in just a few minutes. Let's go back to maybe when NASA was founded in 1958. About a month after that, they established something called the Space Task Group, and they were tasked with developing the first human spacecraft for the United States. That was the Mercury project. And it was moving along. And then in May of 1961, President Kennedy says, well, this is good. We've now had a 15-minute suborbital flight, Alan Shepard's flight. But now we want to go to the moon and do it before the end of the decade. All of a sudden, everybody realized the Space Task Group, working in their offices at Langley Research Center, they just didn't have the facilities to handle that kind of massive project in that short time period. And so they had to establish, as you said at the opening, the Manned Spacecraft Center here in Houston. And that took a few years to actually build the center here at Clear Lake. In the meantime, they were working out of 14 different buildings in Southeast Houston, trying to make this whole project work, starting the Gemini program, working on Apollo. It was an evolutionary thing. They brought about 600 people from Langley, and they were hiring like crazy because they needed people to do this amazing job of getting us to the moon in less than 10 years. And really nobody knew how to do that. So they were writing the textbooks as they were building the buildings and figuring out what kind of training facilities they needed and how do you select more astronauts, and all those things were tasked to the Manned Spacecraft Center. And that evolved through the 1960s, and we went through the Gemini program to test out all the technologies that we would need to get us to the moon, the rendezvous, the docking, the spacewalking, and so forth, and keeping people healthy for long enough that we can get to the moon and back. And so that was an evolutionary process. And once we landed on the moon, okay, mission accomplished, we finished that goal. It was time to move on to other projects. So the space shuttle came along. And of course, NASA, JSC in particular, had to adapt to that new program. It was far more complex. Nobody had ever built a reusable space vehicle like the space shuttle. So we needed to learn how to do that. So we used the facilities we already had here. We expanded upon them. We had to build larger training facilities, hire new astronauts. So again, it was a whole new level of doing human spaceflight. And then, of course, International Space Station came along. Yet again, we had to take on a new, far more complex project, learning how to keep people going, essentially 24/7 operations. We just really had not done that before. So that was a whole new process. So I think based on all that experience that we built up over the last 60 years, we are supremely well positioned to take on all these new projects that will take us out of low Earth orbit and back to the moon, and hopefully beyond that in the next few years. So we have the facilities, we have the people, we have the expertise, we have the knowledge. It's all in place.
And from speaking to all of you, I also see the element of passion there. You guys are all very, very excited about this new era of exploration and discovery. So I wanted to open it up to the group a little bit. I would love to hear from all of you, some of you, if you can share one thing with our viewers today about how JSC is preparing us for exploration and discovery. What from your perspective or the area that you work in, what would you say about that? Don't all answer at once.
Okay, well, I'll just jump in because it's kind of a continuation to my previous answer. And I'm going to jump off what Ryan said about the cell studies that are now going on Space Station. I remember when I worked on Shuttle Mir, we did one of the first cell biology experiments trying to grow a cell culture aboard the Mir space station. And compared to what's happening today, it was relatively primitive. But even back then, we knew that it was just the start of something big, that eventually we could get to where we are today and move beyond that to actually we could actually build organs in microgravity aboard a facility. And so that evolutionary process is really what is going to get us to Moon and Mars, not just in the science areas, which I'm very familiar with, but also all the technology. We built on the Apollo program to build Orion. We've now expanded to the commercial area, which is something we hadn't thought about 5 or 10 years ago. And that's probably going to open up even more areas that we probably can't even imagine today. And that all of that will help us to achieve the goals of getting to the moon and then on to Mars.
I would like to add to what Ryan said a little bit in the area of technology. We've talked about 20 plus years of human habitation in space, and that's extremely important to understand what happens to humans living in microgravity away from where we evolved. But people, I think, also underestimate the technology and the importance of the technology. What that really means is we've had 20 years of operational life support systems and waste management compartments and power systems and communication systems. And those are extremely difficult things to build and operate reliably, continuously, while people are dependent on them to survive. And so the space station has given us that opportunity, and we are applying all that to the next generation stations for Gateway and then for vehicles to go to Mars. So we have a wonderful platform we are continuing to exploit with those technologies. The commercial partners are coming on and learn and absorbing that technology as fast as we can transfer it to them. And then we're going to take that and use that for Gateway in order to start and extend that technology to the next logical place to be, and that's in lunar orbit, where we can safely still experiment with these technologies and figure out how to operate these vehicles, how to make them more autonomous, because when you go to Mars, there's many points of the orbit that you don't get to talk. You have to be autonomous and operate independently. And so I think for me, that's one of the biggest interesting changes over time, is how we're moving these technologies forward over these different platforms and bringing in this commercial aspect to help us advance the exploration mission.
And can I add to what Rod says, even in low Earth orbit, I mean, we are transferring the knowledge. I mean, up until now, NASA's been the only agency to build US to build a space station, right? And so to enable the commercial sector to be able to do the same thing, we have to transfer the knowledge. And so that's one of the things we're going to be doing over the next years, right? Is really that transfer of knowledge, the technology transfer, so that they are able to, and they will bring their own innovation, as I said, innovative solutions to it, too. And so that combination is a powerful one.
I'll add to what all three of you said, because it's all, what I love about this entire panel is it's all connected. So, right, your question was how does our history take us forward to the moon and Mars? And JSC is this wonderful little microcosm that I feel like I was just really privileged to get to peek at in different ways when I was working for the center director over the last year and a half or so. But it's this little microcosm of people who are at one point so technically competent, we can do all of the things that my colleagues have said here, but also dreamers to think up of what's coming next. And it all comes in one place where you have these people just passionate to be a part of where we're going. And I think that's one of the highlights at JSC that kept coming up as I interviewed people over the last couple of years.
Yes, so on Orion, so we're able to leverage those decades of experience here at JSC to make significant contributions. We lead the program office here out of JSC. Substantial part of the engineering is done here at JSC. We do safety and mission assurance. We have FOD that leads and executes the flight operations, health and medical. Of course, we've got the flight crew office here as well. So we've really got all the skills necessary to run a complex program like Orion, and it's because of the rich history that JSC has that we've got that talent.
Definitely, and I recall recently just seeing some of the imagery of Orion stacked at the Kennedy Space Center Vehicle Assembly Building. So Chuck, do you want to tell us a little bit about what we can look forward to? I know you mentioned Artemis 1, but I know there's a bigger story to tell there.
Sure, we're coming down the home stretch, getting ready to fly Artemis 1. Of course, Artemis 1 is a uncrewed mission to the moon. It's the first flight on the new SLS heavy lift vehicle. The Orion spacecraft is fully fueled. It's serviced with all its fluids and gases, and it's pretty much ready to go. We were mated to the SLS launch vehicle a couple of weeks or so ago. We've done initial spacecraft power on and health checks after that mating, and everything looks good. We'll be participating in more powered testing in the coming couple of months, and looking forward to a launch probably second week of February, I think is when our launch window opens. It'll be a long mission, at least 26 days, possibly 42 days, depending on the exact day that we get to launch. We'll be flying a very unique orbit as compared to what Apollo flew. Apollo flew very low, relatively low altitude orbit, close to the lunar surface, and went around an orbit in about an hour or so. For us to complete an orbit, it's more like a 2-week orbit. So it's a much higher orbit. It's called a distant retrograde orbit, or DRO. I'm sure you guys will hear about that. So it's anyway, it's going to be a very unique mission. Going to be very exciting, flying the first production version of the spacecraft. It'll be our fourth flight, but the first pretty much full up spacecraft, and on our real ride, our real heavy lift SLS vehicle.
I get butterflies as you're speaking. So, and then it looks like, again, everybody here is getting those same butterflies. So, you know, I look back 50 years and you mentioned flight controls ready, vehicles fueled, we're basically ready to launch, you know, and I think about the Apollo mission control, and I just wanted to take a minute. John, you were part of the team in 2019 that was responsible for the restoration of Apollo mission control. That project was a large undertaking, and if any of you haven't had a chance to see it, I highly recommend you take a look. Every last detail has been thought about. But can you talk a little bit about that restoration project and the impact the Apollo program had at JSC?
Well, sure. Thanks for that question. It's a big one. Obviously, Apollo was kind of the reason why JSC was built. It was to get us to the moon. That was the goal that was set by President Kennedy. And of course, the mission control function was one of the ones established for the Manned Spacecraft Center at the time. And so that was controlled out of the Mission Operations Control Room, or the MOCR, for Apollo 11 over in Mission Control Center. And that room was also used in the early days of the shuttle until about 1992, before it was retired. And so they made modifications from the Apollo configuration as we flew through the shuttle. There were upgrades made. And after it was retired, it kind of fell into some disrepair. And of course, with the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 coming up, the idea was, well, we probably ought to restore this so, when visitors come to see it, it would look more like what really would have looked like during Apollo 11. And that's easier said than done, because number one, it was declared a National Historic Landmark in 1985, which means you can't just go in there and move things around and take things out. It has to be done per a certain set of rules. And so our office, and it was primarily our chief historian, Dr. Jennifer Ross-Nazal, who helped with that process to give the historical perspective on the control center, help develop kind of the historical dialogue about the story that can be told to people who come visit the center. So she worked closely with our historic preservation officer, Sandra Tetley, to make all that happen. A lot of other folks were involved too, so it was a huge team effort. And it took a couple of years to get all the consoles restored. And as you said, everything was literally restored back to the original condition as it would appear during Apollo 11. I mean, down to the armchairs, to the ashtrays, to just about everything in the control center is back to original equipment. And so when you go there, you kind of feel the whole experience of the moon landing. There's video playing, there's audio playing, so you feel like it's July 20th, 1969. And so it was our pleasure in our office to participate in that, in restoring that truly unique historic place to its original condition.
And your response, John, gave me goosebumps. I can't wait for 50 years from now when folks are looking back at Artemis and where we are on Mars and where we're exploring beyond Mars as well. So that's just such an exciting project to be a part of. So I wanted to pivot for a second over to Gateway with Rod. Can you tell me a little bit about how Gateway is different from other NASA programs, and what excites you most about this?
That's interesting. It's extremely different. And I would tell you, in all the years, so all my early career, we have a very classical approach at any engineering-driven, I guess, agency, where you have a goal and a mission, and you define your concept of operations, you derive your requirements, you flow those requirements into logical engineered elements, you divide those elements up and you get them built, and then you plug it all back together and you get a spacecraft. And so it's a very top-down driven approach where the design and the concept flows all the way through to the end item. And you end up with a very unique and custom purpose-built vehicle, much like the shuttle was or the Apollo was, Mercury, all the vehicles. Gateway is opposite day. Gateway is an attempt to take and aggregate commercial systems into a cohesive, useful spacecraft. So we started with the commercial bus, which is actually it's a satellite bus. It's built by Maxar. They have 90 of these buses operating in space today, and it's the basis of their satellite, and it provides, like I said before, the ability to create, generates power. It does attitude control, and it communicates to the Earth and controls the overall stack. And so we started with that commercial bus, their 1300 series, and tweaked it to become the core element for our gateway, our foundational element. Then we go to Northrop Grumman, and we take their orbital resupply vehicle for space station, and we take that module and we modify it to whatever extent's necessary to let it become a habitable element and permanently attached to the gateway as part of our space station, the first element. And then we have IHAB, and they come along and do the same thing. So what we were doing is, instead of writing requirements that go all the way down to the thread size of particular pieces of hardware, we're writing the requirements as capabilities and working with commercial vendors and using their heritage systems as much as possible, and then trying to figure out how to plug those systems together. And so that is an extremely exciting opportunity. It's a challenge, it's a puzzle. You have to be flexible. You have to work with these different vendors to understand their system architecture and how you can make it work. And you have to adapt. So you have to become very adaptable at how you are going to meet your mission goals and the objective of your program. I often use anecdotes like it's like buying an engine for a Ford and the body from Subaru and a computer from someone else, trying to make it all work together. And yet it's a really exciting challenge. And I think that's the way the agency is moving. And as we transition from top-down driven engineering to aggregation of commercial systems that are being promoted in LEO and across the logistics and transportation systems, that's how we're shifting our overall expertise in our management job. So.
That's a really great way of putting it. I liked your little anecdote as well, but we're getting close to the end of our time for our panel today. And I wanted to give each of our panelists to take a moment and summarize their thoughts. Our topic today is how is 60 years of JSC propelling us forward to the moon and Mars? So if you could summarize your thought in one or two key sentences, why don't we start with you, John?
Okay, I guess I'm going to jump off of something that Ryan said about vision, because in 1961, the area where JSC is now located was coastal prairie, basically. And somebody had the vision to turn that into the leading human spaceflight center and made that vision a reality. And, 8 years later, we landed on the moon. So vision is key in making sure you can implement your vision. And as exciting as the past 60 years have been and everything that we have accomplished here, I cannot wait to see what happens in the next 60 years.
Thanks so much. What an inspiration. Chuck?
Well, for me, it's really just a humbling experience to be able to be part of it. I mean, JSC is a fabulous institution, has a fabulous history, monumental missions, and the people that work here are not only exceptionally talented, but of the highest integrity of anybody you can meet. So it's really a privilege to work here. The institution and the people has made me a better engineer, made me a better person being part of it. So it's really humbling to be part of it. Thank you.
Truly appreciate that, Chuck. Rod?
I would say that over 50 years, we put humans on the moon. In the last 20 years, we've had them in space. I can remember saying to folks that when we were talking about space station, one day there will be a generation that's never not seen folks in space, and that generation's here today. And in 5 years, we will start sustainable exploration of the lunar vicinity. So I think that's an incredibly exciting time. JSC has been in a leadership role in all of those programs, and it will continue to do so.
Camille?
Well, JSC is at the forefront of commercialization, right? And when I talk commercialization, building economies, not just in low Earth orbit, we are building economies on the moon too. We didn't talk about that, the Commercial Lunar Payload Services, right, project. And so JSC is at the forefront of that. We are leading the way for what it means to open up access to space for everyone through commercialization. And I'm just excited, I'm honored, I'm privileged to be a part of it. And it's incredible. It's an incredible, incredible opportunity and privilege. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Camila. Last but not least, Ryan.
There is probably not much I can add. I resonate with everything everybody said. It is such an exciting time to be not only a part of the aerospace community, but JSC. Chuck, you're right. The people are phenomenal. Their passion, their minds, how they show up every day at work. It's just truly humbling and a privilege to be here.
I don't think I've worked anywhere else where every single person I've crossed paths with, including all of you today, has been so excited to work where they work. So I really, really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much to our panelists who help us look forward to the moon and onto Mars. Celebrating 60 years is definitely a milestone. And thanks so much for joining us today. Here's to 60 more years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Subscribe for more space.